Greetings, dear friends, fellow programmers, and those aspiring to be. I have a challenge for you. I want you to imagine entering a library where no books are labeled or organized in any reasonable way. You would have terrible time trying to find anything. Any book you're looking for, you would probably be not able to find. And it is exactly the same when you are working with code that is not properly named. So in this video, I will be talking and sharing my experiences about the importance of good naming conventions and proper naming of your variables, methods, classes, and everything else that goes into the process of coding. So if that sounds interesting, sit down and enjoy the ride. First, let's discuss what great naming conventions are going to improve in our code. So the first point, of course, is going to be it's going to improve readability, because we will have much easier time to understand what the other person or we ourselves wanted to express with a certain function or a variable or a class or whatever. It will be much easier to understand the code and read it. Second point is going to be maintainability. When we can understand the code better, it will be a lot easier for us to extend it and do whatever you like when it comes to manipulating it. So well-named code is going to be much easier to maintain, extend, and update in any way, shape, or form. That is why you should definitely pay attention to your naming conventions. Third point is going to be collaboration again. You definitely do not want to piss off your colleagues when you use terrible naming. And you can even do misleading stuff by naming your variables and methods in incorrect way. That way you will lead them to believe that your method does something it really does not do. And finally, point number 4, we are going to have much easier time to debug the code. When you understand it and names are meaningful and give you some additional context about the code, you will have much easier time to debug it as well. Let me give you an example. First, we have a method that states do work, and its input parameter is called x. And you need to figure out what this method does by going into the implementation of this method and figuring out what it actually does. So you will spend significant time when the algorithm, as is the case on the image here, is complex and you need to spend time understanding it. And then you have the same method that does the same exact thing, but it is named properly. When you name it correctly, you do not have to take a look at the code itself. You will know that when you input a list, you will receive that same list but ordered in ascending order. You do not care if it is bubble sort algorithm, you just care about the outputs. So if you do want to change the implementation, you can do that, but you know the overview what this method does. And you know it just from reading the name of the method. It doesn't say do work. So what we achieved by proper naming here, we achieved better clarity, we reduced the changes of errors, and also we improved the effectiveness of you figuring out what this method does. And now I will not end things in this fashion. I want you to come with me to the Visual Studio and do this in action. Let us get things going from our previous example and extend on it. Now let us try to make it even more easier to understand by introducing proper naming. So let's jump right into it. And here we are, back in our Visual Studio. So what we have here is the situation that we began with in the previous video, but we no longer care about it because we already improved on it. So let's minimize it and head to our current situation. We have flattened the code from initial state, but it is still difficult to understand what it does because it basically contains just a bunch of I's and J's and letters. It doesn't provide us with context. So let's change that. First things first, I will copy the exact same situation as we had in the final state of the previous video, so we can modify it and play around with it basically. So what we want to go with is basically something that will let us know what this method does actually. Process data, no nesting isn't really useful. We do not know what processing means. So let's rename it to reduce even numbers to 0. And that is because this method does exactly that. It will check the data and go through all of its elements and then update it accordingly. So let us continue with our renaming. Next in line is renaming the initial input parameter. So let us rename it into initial list of numbers, because it is an initial list that contains integers or numbers. This time now we have much easier time understanding what we are working with. We know that it is initial list before we modify it, so we can proceed and continue improving. And next in line is going to be our for loop, where we have index I, which doesn't tell you a lot. So we will need to rename it as well, and we will do that into current index. So current index will be more meaningful and reasonable, because you will know that we are talking about the current index that we are working with and going through all the elements of our initial list. So let's rename it. And now when you try reading this line, it sounds a lot better, to be honest. You can read it like initial list of numbers of current index. And if this value is less than 0, then we continue. And now we're left with just one more thing that we can improve, and that is J index. And what it does, it is being used as comparison index. We use it to compare the value on index J with the value at index I, so we can rename it into comparison index. That way, when you read the code again, everything will be much more easier to understand. You're checking whether current index is equal to comparison index, and then you will be comparing basically same value with same value. That makes no sense. And everything else is way more reasonable and meaningful. So now I hope you have a much better idea and easier time understanding what this method does for us. If that is the case, I would like to kindly invite you to join the comment section of this video and leave your personal opinion about this topic, maybe how you would name stuff even better than I did, because I'm just a human, I'm limited by my potentials and my capabilities, and I'm sure you guys will do better than I did. So if you enjoyed this video, I would like to kindly invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications, so you do not miss the upcoming uploads, because we are just getting started. And finally, I would like to thank you for watching and wish you an amazing day. Happy coding!